Alright, what is up guys? Welcome back to another Path of Exile 2 video with some Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction soundtrack in the background. Today we're going to talk about PoE 2 patch 0.3, some of my thoughts on it, speculation, this little teaser here that they've released, what I hope is in the patch, what I think is going to be in the patch, and just kind of my thoughts on the current state of the game. So first off, if you don't mind hitting that subscribe button, really appreciate it, helps me out. We hit 1,400 subs recently, now we're going to go for 1,500. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at this teaser here. It's pretty vague. There's not really much we can garner from this. I mean, a lot of people are thinking and saying that it means, oh, Act 4 is going to be released. If you look down here, like this kind of looks like a 4. It's hard to really tell. You know, you've got a couple words here. Some of them you can't really determine what they are based off being the scribbles. A couple of the symbols are repeated, like this one is repeated down here. So potentially you've got winter beginning birth, you know, king something something, winter beginning birth. This potentially as well. That's about it. That's about all we can get from it. Some other people have said if you squint your eyes that this kind of looks like it spells druid, which that is kind of true. But if that was the case, then we should be able to squint our eyes and get some information from some of these other, you know, letters or symbols, what have you. I mean, I would be shocked if Druid is not in the upcoming patch. It would be a huge disappointment if not. So, what we've heard is that this is the biggest patch ever in PoE 2's history, which I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but that's not really saying a whole lot. There hasn't really been, aside from the initial release, a very large patch for the game. There's been, you know, a little bit of tweaks here. We've got one new class, we've got a couple new ascendancies. You know, there's been a little bit of content in the last patch as far as mechanics go. They added, you know, the wisps, which is not, you know, really saying a whole lot. So it, you know, there's not a lot that it would take to be the quote-unquote biggest patch of all time in PoE 2's history. So my thoughts on what this means and kind of what is coming out, I would say it's going to be very difficult for them to balance the game by adding in a fourth act. It would kind of really change everything about the pacing, the leveling. It makes sense now that if they were to go from having 3 acts repeated, so we've been playing the game through a full 6 acts, we're just repeating the same 3 twice. So for them to then roll out a 4th act, the sequencing would be very off if you play Act 1 through 4 and then repeat Act 1 through 2 again. It seems to me that there would be a fairly large amount of rebalancing and pacing that would have to take place if they were going to just change the game to be from Act 1 through 4. So I think that based off that, there's a, you know, realistic chance that they may be adding Acts 4 through 6. And I'm going to give you my thoughts on why I think that that's very likely to happen, because we've seen a lot of content previously before the game came out of those later acts, especially Act 4 and Act 5. It seems like they've been really keeping Act 6 under wraps. I think it's, you know, a lot of people have speculated we're going to be going into the Beyond, or which is kind of like the hell of the Path of Exile universe. So I think that when GGG released PoE 2, they purposefully held a lot of content back that was ready for launch, just because the consumers, us, you know, individuals who play the games, we are very demanding. And, you know, let's say whatever it is that they released on day 1, very soon after we're going to be demanding more and more content. And if all they could give us regularly every 3 to 4 months is what we got in the last patch, we would probably pretty quickly lose interest, and it would be hard to bring players back. So I think that they kept, you know, a lot of content. I think they had a lot more classes ready for launch, or at least, you know, in a playable state. Same thing with more acts. You know, I think Act 4 and 5 were probably at minimum ready to go at the time that Early Access launched. And if you remember some of the developer interviews, they even stated, you know, we think we'll have the entire game released within a year of beta. And initially beta was going to launch in November, and then it got pushed back a little bit. But, you know, we're pretty much, you know, we're approaching that 1 year time frame. So from this patch release, we know the next content update will be 4 months from that. That will be basically the 1 year time frame from the early access launch. And maybe they won't have everything fully released, but I think that they need to be at least pretty close to having everything released at that point, or, you know, they're going to be pretty far off schedule. So, you know, I think that most players have complained that playing Act 1 through 3 twice was very tedious, and even for myself, like, the thought of going back and doing it again in a new league is not, you know, making me want to come back and play the game. I would still come back and play it anyways, just because, you know, I'm a glutton for, you know, this type of game. But it's not, you know, like, I have no problem, like, grinding through something like that to get to the end game, but a lot of people don't. And even myself, like, if they were to release Act 4 through 6, that would be a huge draw for me. Like, I would be hooked, you know, immediately just to hear that was coming out. So I would say that it's very likely, in my opinion, that they're going to release Act 4, 5, and 6. If you think that they're going to set the standard that, hey, every 4 months we're going to release one new act, I think you're grossly underestimating GGG, and you may not have really been playing PoE in the last, you know, 5-10 years. If there was a time where, you know, because they were very ambitious when they came out and they said, hey, this is going to be a 10-act game in the early stages of PoE 1. And they got to, what, Act 4 or 5, and then all of a sudden they released 5 acts at once, and it was kind of crazy. Like, nobody saw that coming, because we'd gotten acts, like, once, you know, every 3 to 6 months, or, you know, it took quite some time for them to roll out the first few acts, and then boom, they hit us with, like, they took out the, you know, harder difficulties, and they added in 5 or 6 acts all at the same time, and it was just kind of mind-boggling, and I think everybody loved it. I think this is going to be a similar situation to that, where they drop all these, you know, final acts on us at the same time, so we can complete the story and experience, like, the full, you know, sort of pacing of the game. And I also think that, you know, like I said, they held back several classes. I mean, we've seen a lot of footage on the Druid, and so I would be shocked if the Druid is not in this patch. I would say it's almost guaranteed that the Druid will be in this patch as well. We also know that all of the classes from PoE 1 are going to be returning in, you know, maybe slightly different states, you know, except for minus the Scion. I don't know if I can't remember if they confirmed she was coming back or not, or if it was just the original classes. So I would expect to see at least a couple of those potentially, and, you know, and then at least probably 2 Ascendancy classes for each of those character classes. Maybe they won't have all 3 for them, but at least 2, I would say, for each class that they release. I also fully expect there to be new weapons. If they don't release some of the new weapons, I think that's going to be a huge detriment to the game, especially to your strength, like, based, like, physical melee classes. There's a huge gap there in what's even possible to do, because you've got this entire passive tree with all these different weapon options, and currently the only strength-based melee weapon we have is the hammer. And so that's very limiting in what we can and can't do for a melee class that's strength-based, because currently really the only other melee weapons are the weapons that are like dex and int based, like fist weapons, the stav weapons. Like it's kind of interesting how in this they differentiated between like caster staves and then melee staves. So I thought that was a little interesting direction that they took in this. But they've also, like, flails is a new weapon class. There's whatever the druid weapon is going to be. I don't remember what it's called. But there's like a class, you know, basically shape-shifting weapons that they're adding, which are going to be, you know, geared towards the druid. So there's a lot of weapons, you know, like there's the swords, the axes that we just don't have. I feel like they have to add at least swords and at least axes, one or the other. I think flails, you know, if they release the Templar, the flail seems to be geared towards the Templar class. I'm also curious where the starting points are going to be for some of these other classes, because if you look at the current passive tree and where the classes are on it, I'm almost wondering if it's like the Titan. If the Titan is going to start in the same space as the Karui, oh gosh, the Marauder, like if they're a pure strength class, are they going to have the same starting point on the tree? And if it's like a strength int hybrid like the Templar or the Druid, are they going to have the same starting point on the tree? Because I'm based off kind of where some of the nodes are. Like there's some of the shape-shifting nodes that seem to be geared towards like the shape-shifting stuff flavor of, you know, the game. It seems to be also near some flail nodes and a lot of shield nodes, so it makes me think that that's how that is going to work, is that those classes will have the same starting point on the passive tree. I could be wrong, but just based off how the current tree looks, I'm assuming that's how it's going to work. Otherwise, they're going to have to fit in like 6 or 7 more starting points, and that could possibly get a little messy. So that's my speculation on what this teaser is about. You know, it's kind of hard to even decipher anything from it, really. And what my thoughts are, just based off like the past things that GGG has done and player expectations, etc., etc. So that's what I think is coming. Now I want to talk a little bit about the current state of PoE 2, and I think what will happen if they release enough content versus if they don't. So let's just take a look at Steam charts here right now. PoE 2 currently in the last 30 days, averaging about 6,900, 7,000 players. Peak player count about 12,000. You know, not great, not terrible. Certainly a huge drop from where it was at launch. There was, you can see, massive interest in the game when it first came out. And like I was saying again, so 4 months from now, we're going to be at the end of December, so that would put us at that around 1 year time frame. Hopefully they'll have the majority of the content out by then. You know, like I said, that was their initial estimation and like goal for themselves, that they stated at the time. So that puts us on path for another major patch to come out in 4 months, which is going to be the end of December. So looking at the average players, you can just see major drop off, huge interest in the game at the drop of the last major patch in April, but again, nowhere near what they had at launch. And this peak player count, if we look at Steam, so the most, oh, I can't sort. So the all-time peak for PoE 1 is half of the, you know, less than half of the all-time peak for PoE 2. So PoE 2 clearly had a ton of interest, and I think if they drop all 3 remaining acts at the same time, we will probably get close to and possibly even exceed this player count. So in my opinion, that would just be smart business, smart marketing. But currently, looking at PoE 1, like our average peak players is 4 times, or yeah, a little over 4 times the current average players for PoE 2, and then also the peak player count is about six times or so higher, and that's both within the last 30 days. You can see here when the patch dropped for PoE 1 in June, average players was at about 51k, peak players at about 178. So you can see when a patch comes out, it's about double for PoE 2 what it is for PoE 1, just looking at the numbers, but the drop off is a lot harder and a lot faster. I think just because the lack of content, so people were like, oh hey, a big patch came out in PoE 2, maybe they don't follow it as closely and they didn't know what all was going to be in the patch, and pretty quickly they came back and they're like, okay, there's really not much here since the last time I played, and they quickly kind of lost interest. And I think, you know, if they do this next patch right, it could be a huge just win for PoE 2. Another game that came out recently into early access was Titan Quest 2, which I have not played it yet, but I did pick it up because they had it on a 20% discount, and I've heard that there's not really a lot of content in it, you know, only maybe a few hours worth of like gameplay before you're basically going back and playing through the same areas again. So I picked it up because it was on sale, and I know I'm going to play it, you know, down the road. So you know, if I get bored one day after, you know, I feel like playing it, I might fire it up, but probably wait for some more content to come out in it. But you can just see here, peak players was at about 27k, and you know, like the game just came out within the last week, so not bad. It's basically, you know, it's competing with PoE 2's current player base and possibly like greatly exceeding it at the moment. And then we look at Last Epoch. So you can kind of see Last Epoch still a distant contender for PoE 1, or sorry, PoE 2, but they do have like a decent amount of interest going on in the game, and they have not really had a patch since about April as well. But you know, there is a lot of interest in this game. I think it's a very well made game, and it is very fun to play. It's just right now they're on the same patch schedule as PoE 2, so you know, that's tough for them kind of to compete with. So going back to just, you know, my thoughts on the game and its current state, I think if, like I said, they release enough content, and it's the content, you know, I think it's gonna be phenomenal when they release it. I was like very interested in the story of PoE 2 as I was playing through it. Like, it was giving me some really good like Diablo 2 storytelling vibes. And in my opinion, Diablo 2 had some of like the best storytelling, cinematics, and just the way the story was presented of all time. Like, it just, you know, not to spoil anything if you've never played it, but at the end of the game, my mind was completely blown with the plot twists and how the story was presented. It was just, the voice acting was amazing, the presentation was amazing, the characters, the atmosphere, it was just, you know, phenomenal. And I think PoE 2 was capturing that, or is capturing that. So I'm interested to see where the story's headed, and I'm interested to see what the gameplay is going to be like when we have a few more options and just content in the game. You know, because right now I think it's so limited to what's there that we're just not able to fully experiment with everything that, you know, potentially we could do to really make the builds interesting and unique. So those are my thoughts, guys, on the upcoming patch 0.3, and hopefully hopefully it's good. Hopefully it's got a lot of new content, a lot of new classes. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you think is going to be in it, what you think possibly this teaser here is referring to or referencing or means down in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And remember to give them the D.